Imagine this. It's a warm August afternoon in 1901. You're walking through the gardens of the Palace of Versailles. The sun is shining. The flowers are in full bloom. You're on holiday. Life is good. Now imagine that as you turn a corner, the world around you changes. The light goes flat. The air grows heavy. And the people you see are wearing clothes from another century. And they're staring at you. Not with curiosity, with hatred. This is not imagination. This is not fiction. This is exactly what happened to two of the most respectable women in England. And what they discovered afterwards will make you question everything you think you know about time. Let me tell you their story. The two women were Charlotte Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain. Now, these are not fanciful people. Charlotte was the principal of St. Hugh's College at Oxford University, a serious academic, a leader in women's education. Eleanor was the headmistress of a prestigious girls' school, also serious, also highly respected. Neither of them believed in ghosts. Neither of them had any interest in the supernatural. They were in Paris for a simple holiday. Nothing more. On August 10th, 1901, they decided to visit Versailles. They toured the main palace, had a pleasant lunch, and then decided to take a walk through the famous gardens. Their destination was a small, private building called the Petit Trianon. This was Marie Antoinette's personal hideaway, a little escape from the pressures of being queen. So they set off, map in hand. The gardens were beautiful, but as they walked, something changed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. Charlotte later described it as a strange, heavy depression that came over her, like a dark cloud settling on her shoulders. The air itself felt different, thick, oppressive, and the light, the bright summer sun, seemed to dim. The vibrant colors of the flowers faded. Everything looked flat and muted, like walking into an old oil painting. And then they saw him, the first figure. He was standing near an old building, wearing a long green coat and a three-cornered hat. He stared at them. His expression was hostile, unwelcoming. Charlotte thought he must be a gardener or a guard. But his clothes, they were old, genuinely old, not costume, not a uniform, 18th century old. The man just stood there, staring until they walked past. They tried to shake off the strange feeling and continued walking, but things only got stranger. They passed two more men. These ones were wearing long gray-green coats and small pointed hats. They carried long wooden sticks. Gardeners, perhaps, but their faces were scarred and pitted with smallpox. And they looked at the two women with an expression that Charlotte later described as evil and unkind. Not just unfriendly, evil. Then they reached a small garden kiosk near a fountain. And sitting there, in the shade, was a woman. She was wearing a light green summer dress with long sleeves. A white headdress covered her hair. She had a sketchbook open on her lap and a pencil in her hand. She looked up at them, and her face was filled with pure, undisguised hatred. Charlotte froze. She wrote later that it was the most menacing expression she had ever seen on a human face. The woman said nothing. She just stared at them with utter contempt. Then she turned back to her drawing as if they didn't exist. The two friends hurried on, deeply unsettled. And then a young man appeared. He was tall, handsome, with dark hair and a confident smile. But his face, like the gardener's, was marked with smallpox scars. He walked straight up to them and spoke in French. "Mesdames, you should not be here. You must go this way." He gestured toward a small wooden bridge that they hadn't noticed before. It was rustic, old, almost hidden among the trees. Without thinking, they crossed it, and they entered a part of the garden that felt completely different. Secluded, silent, secret. And there, sitting alone on a stone bench outside a small, elegant building, was a young woman. She had long blonde hair falling loosely around her shoulders. She was wearing a pale, old-fashioned summer dress and holding a delicate fan. She looked up at them as they approached, and her face was the saddest thing they had ever seen. A deep, profound sadness. A loneliness that was almost unbearable to look at. She said nothing. She just looked at them with those sad eyes. And without knowing why, they turned and fled. Back at their hotel in Paris, neither of them spoke about what had happened. It was too bizarre, too impossible. They must have imagined it. The heat, the tiredness. It was nothing. Months passed. They returned to England. And then one day, Charlotte casually mentioned a strange afternoon at Versailles. And Eleanor went pale. She had seen all. Every single detail. The hostile man in the green coat. The pockmarked gardeners. The woman in green with a hateful stare. The handsome man who pointed them across the bridge. The sad blonde woman on the bench. She remembered everything. So they did what any two respectable academics would do. They launched an investigation. They wrote separate, detailed accounts of everything they had seen and felt. They compared notes. The details matched perfectly. Every person, every expression, every strange feeling. Identical. They returned to Versailles. Again and again. They walked the same path. They searched for the kiosk, the bridge, the secluded garden. And they found nothing. The bridge was gone. It didn't exist on any modern map. The kiosk had vanished. The layout of the gardens was completely different from what they remembered. Everything was modern. Everything was normal. So they went deeper. They dug into historical archives. They studied old maps. They read palace records from the late 18th century. And that is when the true horror of what they had experienced began to sink in. The wooden bridge they had crossed. It had been demolished in 1790. It hadn't existed for over 100 years. The kiosk near the fountain. Also demolished. Also gone since the 1790s. Nothing they had seen matched the modern Versailles. But it did match something else. It matched Versailles in the summer of 1789. The woman in the green dress. After years of research, they identified her. She was the Comtesse de Brion, a lady-in-waiting to Marie Antoinette. And according to surviving palace records, on August 10th, 1789, she was wearing exactly that dress. A light green summer dress, sitting by a fountain, sketching. The records describe her mood that day as agitated and hostile because of the political unrest brewing in France. The tall, pockmarked man who pointed them across the bridge. He matched the description of the Comte de Vaudreuil, a well-known courtier at Versailles, described in historical records as tall, handsome, with a dark complexion scarred by smallpox. He was at the palace on that exact date. And the sad young woman on the stone bench, sitting outside the Petit Trianon, blonde hair loose, pale dress, holding a fan. Marie Antoinette herself. August 10th, 1789, was one of the very last peaceful days of her entire life. The French Revolution was exploding around the country. Within weeks, the royal family would be dragged from Versailles and imprisoned in Paris. Within 4 years, her head would fall into the basket of the guillotine. The sadness on her face that day in the garden was real, because she knew her world was about to end. Charlotte and Eleanor published their findings in a book in 1911, but they used fake names. Elizabeth Morrison and Frances Lamott. They were terrified of what would happen to their reputations if people knew the truth. An Oxford principal and a headmistress claiming to have walked into the past and seen Marie Antoinette. They would be ruined, laughed out of their professions. So they hid behind pseudonyms. The book became a sensation, but they took their secret to the grave. Both women insisted until their dying day that every single word was true. So what really happened on that August afternoon in 1901? Did two serious, respectable, rational women accidentally slip through time? Or is there a more logical explanation? Over a century later, people are still arguing. And that brings us to the three theories. Theory 1, the time slip. Some researchers believe that certain places absorb so much emotional energy that they create a permanent recording in the fabric of reality. A loop. And sometimes, under the right conditions, sensitive people can walk straight into that loop. Versailles, soaked in the trauma of the revolution, would be the perfect place for this. The two women didn't see ghosts. They stepped into a moment of history that is still replaying over and over forever. Theory 2, shared delusion. Psychiatry has a term for this. It's called folie à deux, a shared psychosis. One person has a vivid hallucination. The other person, suggestible and trusting, absorbs the delusion as their own. Charlotte might have had the initial vision. Eleanor simply followed her into it. But here's the problem. How did two women with zero expertise in 18th century fashion describe historically accurate details that were only verified decades later? Details they could not possibly have known in 1901. How do you explain that? Theory 3, the academic hoax. The most cynical view. They made it all up. They wanted fame. They wanted to sell books. But their closest friends and colleagues insisted they were not the type. They were deeply religious, serious, sober, and they never made any real money from the book. They never sought publicity. They hid behind fake names for decades. So why would they risk everything, their entire reputations, their entire careers, for a hoax that brought them no real reward? So I want to ask you, what do you believe? Did two women accidentally walk into the past and sit in the presence of a doomed queen on the last peaceful day of her life? Or was it all just in their minds? And if so, how do you explain the bridge that didn't exist anymore? The dress that was verified by palace records? The face of a queen they should never have been able to recognize? Tell me your theory in the comments. I read every single one. And if you enjoy mysteries that sit on the border between history and the impossible, subscribe and ring the bell. The next story is even stranger.